Hey everyone, today we're gonna talk in depth about the bow, so everything from the moveset, the mechanics, the different playstyles, and recommendations on how best to play the bow. But first things first, we have to talk about the base moveset before we talk about anything else. The first thing we'll talk about is the charge mechanic. Almost every attack the bow has can have 3 levels. Level 1, which is uncharged, level 2, and level 3, which is the maximum charge at this time. We'll talk about this later, but for now we're going to talk about the most basic bow attack, which is called the charged shot. The charged shot is your most basic attack. It's your right trigger on console and your left click on PC, and it fires 1, 2, or 3 arrows depending on your charge level, respectively charge level 1, 2, and 3. This attack will also increase your charge level. So you can see in this clip when I shoot, I go from uncharged to level 2 to level 3. Your next move is called your power shot. It fires arrow in a spread pattern, and not only each arrow is stronger than the arrows from your charged shot, but you also have more arrows per shot. So this is a much more damaging move than your charged shot. You'll notice that at level 1, the power shot is called a quick shot. It's basically a very weak power shot that consumes no stamina. So while you do the quick shot, you're going to regain your stamina. Most of the time you'll be using the power shot after a charge shot, but we'll look at the combos later. And finally we have the power volley. The power volley is basically a second power shot, so if you do 2 in a row, the second one will be a slower, stronger power shot that's called the power volley. There's not much to say about the basic dash, but there was a big addition to Wilds. It's called the Discerning Dodge. If you've played Rise, it's very similar to the dodge bolt, so when the monster is attacking you, you can dash through the attack, and if you connect, you're gonna do a counter dodge. This dodge has a few properties. The first one is that it has a lot of iframes, so it should be very easy to dodge monsters' attacks with it. The second thing is that if you do a Discerning Dodge, you'll instantly be at max charge, but also it will regen some of your stamina and some of your resource meter. We'll talk about the resource meter in a second. Please note that the amount of stamina or resource that you regen is based on the timing of your dodge. So if you dodge at the perfect time, right as the monster is gonna hit you, you're gonna regen all of your stamina and a third of your resource meter. But if the timing of your dodge is not perfect, then you will regen a little bit of stamina and just a little bit of resource meter as well. The next move we're gonna talk about is the swallow shot. The swallow shot is basically a jump shot. You can do it by pressing the cutting button after a dash. It's basically a power shot in the air. It has the exact same damage and arrow count than the power shot. It's just a little slower because you have the jump animation, but you can cover a lot of ground with the swallow shot. You can also climb very high ledges, so when a monster is finding you on a ledge, you can use a swallow shot to keep your combo going as you climb on the ledge. Okay, so let's talk about another new addition to Wilds, is the resource meter. So the resource meter is the little blue bar that you can see on the bottom right of your screen, and it's used for 2 things. One is to apply coatings. Coatings are now infinite in Wilds, and you equip them by using some of your resources. And the resource bar is also used to equip tracer arrows. You have 3 ways of increasing your resource meter. One is to hold the charge on your arrow, and it will slowly go up. 2 is to dodge using the Discerning Dodge like we talked about earlier, and 3 is to use your focus shot move. So like I said, this resource meter is used for 2 things. One is applying cutting, and 2 is to shoot your tracer arrow. So we're gonna talk about a tracer arrow now. So what the tracer does is when you equip it, it's gonna draw a tracer arrow, and it's gonna take a third of your resource meter, and wherever you shoot the monster with it, it's gonna stick to that part of the monster. And like the name suggests, after you shoot a tracer on the monster, every following shot will try to go and reach the tracer arrow. So if you shoot away from the tracer, your arrow will curve to try to reach the tracer. And after 10 to 15 seconds, the tracer will explode and do minimal damage. So one thing you should know is when you have a tracer on the monster, every shot you take will be at max charge no matter what. We'll go back to the tracer later. For now, we're gonna move on to Dragon Piercer. So Dragon Piercer in Wilds has been buffed a lot compared to World and Rise, to the point that it's very viable right now and even competitive compared to regular bow play on some monsters. And there are 3 reasons why Dragon Piercer is more viable now than it was in the past. The biggest reason is that before, he was doing sever damage, so he could cut tails, but he was actually using range hit zones to calculate its damage. But now the damage is based on several hit zones. If you don't know what it means, each monster takes damage differently, whether the damage comes from sever, so like swords, blunt, so stuff like hammer, or range damage from bowguns and bows. And range damage is usually a lot lower hit zones, so they take less damage from ranged than from melee weapons. And it's especially good for Dragon Piercer because it will pierce through the whole body, and if it uses ranged hit zones, a lot of the body will be not a weak point. But for melee, they have a lot more body zones that are weak points. So now in Wilds for Dragon Piercer, you'll see a lot more orange numbers with higher damage values than in previous games. So that's the biggest reason. The second reason is that now we're very much in a raw meta, and Dragon Piercer is almost entirely raw damage, so it's very benefits from that. And the third reason is that now we have two Dragon Piercer. We have the regular one, which is still very slow, and we have what's called Instant Dragon Piercer, which is a lot faster. Instant Dragon Piercer is a Dragon Piercer that you do after a combo, so like a shot or a dodge or anything like that. It's 30% faster, but it does 30% less damage. However, the biggest issue that people had with Dragon Piercer in the past is that it was very slow, so by the time the animation was over, the monster would have moved. So with Instant Dragon Piercer, you now have more opportunities to use Dragon Piercer in shorter openings. Now we have two more basic moves to cover before we move on to the gameplay loop. We have Arc Shot and Thousand Dragon. Now to be straight up with you guys, those moves are pretty bad, so in order to save time, because this guide is already pretty long, my only advice is to not use those moves at all. Okay, so let's finally take a look at the gameplay loop for the bow. When you play bow, the main objective is to spend as much time possible at max charge. But before we talk about staying at max charge, we have to talk about how to get at max charge as efficiently as possible. Typically for bow, we call that ramping up. Ramping up means getting to max charge basically. The most efficient way is to use your Discerning Dodge, because right away, if you do a dodge, you'll be at max charge immediately. However, it's not always possible. Sometimes the monster is down, is not targeting you, or he's doing an attack that you cannot counter. If that's the case, you can simply do what we call a manual ramp up. So that's a charge shot 1, charge shot 2, and then power shot, power volley. Your power shot and your power volley will be at max charge. If you come from World, you might be used to the dash giving you a charge level. That's not the case by default in Wilds unless you use the Discerning Dodge. However, if you pull out an arrow before dashing and you hold the charge, you will charge as you dash. So your first shot will be a charge shot 2, and then you can right away do a power shot and a power volley. There are a few other ways to ramp up, but we'll talk about those later when it makes more sense. For now, once you know how to ramp up, you need to know how to maintain your charge level. So earlier I said that your basic dash would not increase your charge level, but it does maintain your charge level even when it's at maximum level. This is commonly referred as dash dancing. So while you're at max charge, you can dash to maintain your charge and then repeat the combo of charge shot, power volley. And as long as you have stamina, you can keep that chain going. That's dash dancing. On the topic of dash dancing, after a dash, if you input your power shot immediately after shooting your charge shot, you will do a much faster power shot. As you can see on the screen, it is much faster than the regular power shot, which takes some time. Now the next topic is reloading your cuttings. It's an integral part of bow and wilds because you have to reload your cutting constantly. The cutting loading animation is very quick and you can dash almost instantly after doing it. Because of that, the best time to reload your cuttings when you need to is right before a monster is about to hit you. So you reload your cutting and then you can counter the monster's attack to instantly get back to max charge. If you don't have time to reload before a dodge, you can still reload after a dodge and still maintain your max charge. It's a bit tricky to do, but the way you do it is after a dodge, you hold your arrow, you let go of your aim button, and then you reload your cutting. If you don't let go of aim while you do this, you're gonna do a flying swallow shot like you can see on the screen, so you need to make sure that you let go of the aim button. Another way to reload efficiently is to do it during a manual ramp up. If you draw and hold an arrow, then reload your cutting, your arrow will keep charging as you reload, and then your next shot will be charge level 2 instantly. Now a quick word on wounds. For bow, the focus attack is very good. and it allows to stagger the monster for a long time and do a lot of damage. The one advice I can give you when it comes to wounds, when you lock onto a wound, you can lock up to 3 levels, so 1, 2, and 3. It takes a long time, and the difference in damage is almost negligible between level 1, 2, and 3. So my advice when you lock to a wound is to charge to level 1 and instantly let go. So a few more advice that I can give you when it comes to the core gameplay loop of the bow. When it comes to the power volley, it's your highest damaging attack, but it's also your highest commitment attack. A lot of people get hit because they get locked into the power volley animation. My advice is to only do the power volley, so that's the second power shot, if you know you have time to do it. If you're not sure, just stick to the regular power shot until you have an opening big enough to do the volley. Now, when it comes to the tracer arrow, a lot of people have been asking me if it's useful, if it's good, if it's bad. So the truth is that on paper, theoretically, it's always a DPS loss to use tracer because it takes a long time to take it out and shoot it to the monster. And in this time you could use a regular combo that does more damage. However, in practice, I find that the tracer is pretty useful situationally on fights like Zuu, for example, that you can see on the screen, because it's a monster that moves a lot and it has a weird hitbox, so it's difficult without the tracer to land all of your shots constantly. On top of that, the tracer arrow extends your maximum range, so for monsters again like Zuu or other ones, especially when you have close range cutting, it can be difficult sometimes when they go too far away from you to hit them due to limited range. So my thought on the tracer arrow is that in most fights I don't use it at all, but in some fights like Zuu or other fights like him, I really enjoy the tracer arrow for those fights specifically. One more thing about the tracer arrow, it's very important to remember, like I said earlier, that once you have a tracer on, all your shots will automatically be max charge. So you don't have to worry about ramping up, you can dash dance right away from neutral. Okay, I think we covered almost everything about the traditional way to play bow. I have a few quick words about Dragon Piercer. I'm by no means an expert in Dragon Piercer. Actually, I don't really enjoy the gameplay of Dragon Piercer, so my advice are going to be limited. But the few advice that I can give you is to keep the Dragon Piercer spam for long monsters, so things like New Udra, Jin Dahad, monsters like those. It works specifically well in multiplayer because there's a lot of time when you don't have aggro, so you can just spam Dragon Piercer without being bothered by the monster. And if you're gonna use that solo, you need to abuse the wounds to keep the monster staggered as much as possible. And finally, when it comes to Dragon Piercer, you need to get used to using instant Dragon Piercer and regular Dragon Piercer when it's appropriate. When you have a small opening, instant Dragon Piercer is better, and when you have a longer opening or a topple, then the regular Dragon Piercer will do a lot more damage. Okay, before we wrap things up, I have a few words about coatings. In Wilds, there are 3 DPS coatings and there are status coatings. So I'm not gonna talk too much about status coatings because they're pretty self-explanatory, although I will say in Wilds they were nerfed quite a bit, so they're not very efficient. But I mostly want to talk about the DPS coatings. So right off the bat, close range coating as of right now is your best DPS coating no matter what. It has 40% more raw damage and it has no penalty at close range. The only drawback is that the maximum range is a bit shorter than power coating. Power coating will usually be your second best option. It has 30% increased damage, so it's less than close range coating, and it has a penalty on your charge shot when you're too close to the monster. However, you have more range, so if you're not comfortable with close range coating because you have to be too close to the monster, then power coating is a nice replacement. And finally, we have pierce coating. Out of this moment, overall, pierce coating is the worst coating. It does very little damage. Yes, it hits multiple times, but the reduction in damage is too much to be compensated by the additional hits. However, there are some fights where it does quite well, mostly Arc Veiled or Ray Doe, but it's mostly because on those fights, it hits more time than it should because Arc Veiled, for example, his wings are a little bugged and some attack proc multiple times when they shouldn't. Okay, this was a very long video to make. Obviously, there are more things that I could say about the bow, but I think for a bow guide, most of the important points have been covered. If you feel like I missed something or there's something you want me to cover in more detail, please let me know in the comment and I can cover it in a future video. Alright, see you next time.